Okay, hi, good morning. It's great to see everybody here and joining us virtually. Thank you to special guests who have come from Africa and various parts of the US government to be with us. I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's event on civil society's role in stemming violent extremism in the Sahel and littoral states. It's a topic close to my heart, not only because it's a priority mission for us at IRI, working with friends in the US government, but also because I grew up in the Sahel and the littoral states, and frankly have just been alarmed and surprised at how much has changed in many of these countries as relates to security and governance. So we know, of course, that stemming violent extremism is a significant challenge in this region, which will require a holistic approach in order to effectively address drivers of conflict, violence, and instability. It's fundamentally critical to build durable mechanisms to resolve conflict, to enhance social cohesion, to build the capacity of critical institutions to deliver crucial services, and to help mobilize political will and domestic resources to enable lasting peace, stability, security, and ultimately prosperity. The Global Fragility Act and accompanying US strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability are landmark achievements of the United States government, something our friends at the State Department, the USAID, Agency for International Development, and Department of Defense should be very proud of, thanks to the leadership of senior friends from the US government here with us today. The United States now does have a unified framework for mitigating violence in places that matter most for the American taxpayer. As the Global Fragility Act and strategy make clear, addressing the scourge of violent conflict generally and preventing violent extremism from spreading even farther in the Sahel into coastal West Africa will require a couple things. It will require first buy-in and contributions from local communities and civil society organizations, and two, democracy and strong and effective and responsive institutions. Our IRI experience in hundreds of countries across the globe through multiple decades, over 100 countries, substantiates this approach and focus. As we've seen on the ground in countries ranging from Haiti to South Sudan, fragility increases when citizen responsive governance breaks down. The foundations of fragility, corruptions, misappropriation of resources, and predatory governance, among others, do not merely happen upon countries. Regimes, either elected or installed via extra-legal means, impose these vulnerabilities on their citizens to protect themselves and their cronies, and to undercut the mechanisms of political oversight that would temper their access to power and wealth. Fragility, therefore, is fundamentally a political power problem, and one that we need civil society and support for democracy to solve. We're very fortunate to have some of the best minds in the business, both from here in Washington and around the region today to help us talk through this problem set. So to that end, it's a pleasure for me to turn over the conversation to Patrick Quirk, IRI's Senior Director for Strategy Research and the Center for Global Impact, who worked on the Global Fragility Act while in government. And I'm looking forward to staying with you to listen and learn this morning. Thank you. Over to you, Patrick.
Thanks so much, Dan. Thanks to each of you for joining us here and online. I have the great pleasure of moderating today's event and introducing our esteemed guests and friends of IRI from the US government and the region. Before getting into the program, though, a brief word on IRI's work on addressing instability. Our mission, of course, is to support democracy and freedom across the world. This does include, however, a quite large portfolio focused on conflict prevention and stabilization. Working with local partners in many of the 100 countries where IRI has operations, our focus is addressing governance weaknesses in countries affected by conflict to help these states move toward longer-term peace and stability. Our teams have been supporting democracy and helping promote stability in the Sahel and littoral states for now over 10 years. We have established an official partnership with the G5 Sahel and its national violence prevention units, or CELRADs, in Burkina, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, and Niger. With generous funding from NED, we have provided training and capacity building to these units in each of the G5 countries, with a particular focus on ensuring that they incorporate civil society, youth, and women perspectives in their work. We've also provided some capacity building and ensuring they can conduct evidence-based research to ensure their interventions are based on data and not anecdotes. With generous funding from the Department of State's Africa Bureau, we have an ongoing program in 5 of the littoral states. This includes polling in each country to better understand citizens' concerns around the causes of the spread of VE into their communities. And it also includes working with border communities to implement interventions to strengthen resilience to violent extremism penetration. Now, before I introduce our keynote speakers, a few housekeeping points. During the first portion of the program, we'll hear from our 3 U.S. senior officials. We'll then move directly into our panel of experts from the region. Following their intro remarks, we'll open it up for questions to the panel from the audience, here in person and online. Those in our audience joining virtually and wishing to submit a question may do so by sending a message within the Q&A window via Zoom. So at the bottom of the screen, you should see an option to open that box where you'll be able to type and send your question. Please make your question short and precise, questions, vice comments. Finally, a reminder that we are indeed under Chatham House rules for the duration of the discussion. So with that, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce and welcome our 3 senior level officials from the U.S. government. We'll hear first from Assistant Secretary Ann Rakowski, who comes from the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations at the Department of State. Prior to this role, Assistant Secretary Rakowski served at DoD as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Stability and Humanitarian Affairs. Her prior roles at State include as Acting Deputy Coordinator for Homeland Security and Multilateral Affairs in the CT Bureau. She's also served on the National Security Council staff. Then we'll hear from Robert Jenkins, who serves as Assistant to the Administrator for the Bureau of Conflict Prevention and Stabilization at USAID. Assistant Administrator Jenkins previously served as Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Bureau for Democracy, Conflict, and Humanitarian Assistance, and as Director for OTI at USAID. Prior to joining AID, he worked with World Vision International in Southern Sudan and Sierra Leone. Third and finally, before we get to the panel, we'll hear from James Sands, who serves as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Counter-Narcotics and Stabilization Policy for the U.S. Department of Defense. Most recently, prior to joining DoD, DASD Sands worked for the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority as the Senior Operations Advisor to the Chief Operating Officer. DASD Sands served for 30 years as a U.S. Army officer and most of that time in special operations as a Green Beret. With that, Assistant Secretary Rakowski, I'd ask you to come to the podium for remarks. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you to you, Patrick, to the International Republican Institute for organizing this discussion, inviting me to participate, to you, to Dan Twining, and to all our colleagues here, and especially our distinguished guests, our panelists, who we're very much looking forward to hearing from. We have the opportunity, Rob and Jim and I, to speak from time to time together about the important work that we're doing around the implementation of the landmark Global Fragility Act and the related U.S. strategy to prevent conflict and to promote stability. And so we're very honored. I'll speak on my behalf. I'm very honored to be here today, that you've given us an opportunity to do that again, and to talk about what our progress and our concept for the way forward. This is the beginning of an incredible week in which U.S. and African leaders will come together to discuss shared priority and challenges. And we're looking forward to it. It's been almost a year since I was confirmed by Congress as the Assistant Secretary of State for Conflict and Stabilization Operations. And during that time, I think I focused more on coastal West Africa than any other region of the world. I visited Ghana in the spring on one of my first official trips, and this fall traveled with Rob Jenkins, Assistant to the Administrator, and DASD Jim Sines to Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, and Togo. And we also had the opportunity to convene on the margins of the UN General Assembly with our German partners a roundtable on coastal West Africa. So we've been very focused on this particular area in the context of the work that we're doing together on the Global Fragility Act. I think we all share deep concerns about the spread of violent extremist attacks across West Africa. The Central Sahel region experienced more terrorist attacks than any other part of the world in 2021, and we've seen those attacks spread across the borders of Benin and Togo over the past year. Violent extremist organizations are seeking to exploit porous borders, trade routes, and community grievances to expand their operations and build their influence among coastal West African communities. The US strategy towards sub-Saharan Africa identifies the connection between increasing insecurity and declines in democracy. We've seen this play out in the Sahel with a wave of military takeovers. Terrorism and instability exacerbate societal divisions, fuel distrust of governments, and strain democratic institutions that are already under stress because of climate change, economic inequality, and food insecurity. The governments of Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Togo, among others, recognize these interconnected challenges, and we've seen them start to come together to increase cooperation and promote preventive and holistic responses to these growing threats. And the United States strongly supports these types of proactive efforts. And we seek to be a partner in that regard. Earlier this year, President Biden announced that the US government would prioritize partnerships with coastal West African countries to advance the US strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability. We're now working to deepen our partnerships at the regional, national, and local levels, including with civil society, to support peace building and conflict prevention. As many of you know well, our strategy builds on the landmark bipartisan Global Fragility Act, a law that directs us to advance an innovative long-term approach to addressing conflict, violence, and instability across the globe. We're guided by the conviction that America's prosperity and national security depend on peaceful, resilient, and stable economic and security partners, and we seek such partners in West Africa. Soon, as we are working on them, we will provide to Congress the plans that are required under the Global Fragility Act to marshal support under the strategy to work with and assist the priority countries in coastal West Africa. The plans, as we've been working on them, are being developed at the embassy level, field-led, with significant and wide-ranging consultations with our partners in the region. There's also been high-level visits and discussions with regional leaders by Secretary Blinken, Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield, Deputy USAID Administrator Coleman, and other senior officials. We look forward to those discussions continuing this week at the US-Africa Leaders Summit. We aim to help countries in the region prevent the expansion of terrorism and violent extremism into vulnerable border communities by addressing the root causes of national and regional instability. We seek to encourage and help African partners advance integrated approaches to governance, security, and peace building. Specifically, we aim to enhance US engagement and assistance to help increase social cohesion, improve government responsiveness, inclusion, and accountability, and enhance security force responsiveness and accountability. We know that each partner country in coastal West Africa faces unique dynamics and challenges that affect its orientation toward these threats. We're seeking to tailor our efforts according to individual countries, but we also understand that there are certain common challenges and solutions that can be promoted across the region. Strengthening regional cooperation mechanisms and sharing of best practices will be critical components of successful conflict prevention. Social cohesion in coastal West Africa, though fraying in certain areas, is a critical resilience that can help prevent conflict and promote stability. Under the strategy, we are examining ways to help our partners enhance existing efforts at the grassroots, national, and regional levels to reinforce inter and intra-communal ties and counter efforts by violent extremists and other criminal elements to drive wedges between and among communities. In Togo, for example, with resources from the Prevention and Stabilization Fund, the US government is strengthening the capacities of local authorities, municipal actors, and young citizens across 9 at-risk communities. Youth engagement and participation in decision-making at the local level is vital for building inclusive communities and strengthening social cohesion. We're seeking to increase engagement with local communities along the borders of coastal West Africa and the Sahel, especially in marginalized areas. The United States knows from hard-learned lessons that those who are closest and most vulnerable to challenges often also know best where opportunities for peace lie. Our plan, therefore, will place emphasis on forging partnerships at the local level, including with women and youth, to drive positive change in communities. We will also be looking to align our support to the national level plans of partner countries, reinforcing their leadership and commitment to tackling these challenges. We will aim to promote greater cooperation among international donors and partners to better align our collective support and resources towards shared objectives and metrics. Ultimately, with our partners, we hope to demonstrate that democratic governance and respect for human rights deliver for all people, and that this approach is the best way to reduce fragility, advance sustainable development, and mitigate the risks of violent conflict and instability. This is certainly the United States' lived experience, and we believe it is also true in West Africa. The US National Security Strategy puts a fine point on democratic governance, noting one that is consistently outperforming authoritarianism in protecting human dignity. 2, it leads to more prosperous and resilient societies. 3, it creates stronger and more reliable economic and security partners for the United States. And 4, it encourages a peaceful world order. We want to help our partners deliver these democratic dividends in West Africa, including through enhanced, inclusive economic growth. Let me close by noting that we approach these efforts with extreme humility. The work of preventing conflict and promoting stability is deeply challenging. We will be iterative in our work. We will continue to update and adapt the plans we undertake based on consultations with our partners and robust monitoring, evaluation, and learning. With a clear vision, strong commitment to partnership, and a long-term approach, I believe we can make a difference and counter violent extremism and instability in West Africa. Most of all, we look forward to hearing your ideas and feedback, especially with our visitors who are working in West Africa, both today and in the months to come. Thank you for letting me say a few words today and open this event, and I look very much forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Assistant Secretary Wachowski. Assistant Administrator Jenkins, please. Thank you.
Good morning. And so Anne alluded to the fact that we spend some time together, Jim, Anne and I, and it's always Anne goes first. She sounds really smart. I come up with something and then Jim complains that we have left him nothing else to say and has to, so we're gonna do that again. So Dan, thank you very much. Patrick, it's great to see some new colleagues and also some former colleagues and friends in the room. Greg Kearns and I, when we were very young in the early 90s, jumped around planes together in Southern Sudan and tried to deliver food and had a lot of fun doing it. Like Anne, I've been focusing a lot on this part of the world for quite some time. So in the last administration, about 2018, 2019, USAID undertook its largest rejiggering and redesign in its history. We called it transformation. And the bureau that I have the honor of leading now, our Bureau for Conflict Prevention and Stabilization, was slowly coming into focus. And we decided we can't change the way we do business everywhere at once. We need to focus on a place. And we picked the Sahel and coastal West Africa back in 2019. Some of our staff thought we were crazy. Why not pick a real priority? Why not pick Afghanistan? Why not pick Syria? Look at all these other places that have a big attention in our government. We thought it would be best to pick a place that we can maybe prevent something from getting worse and didn't have all that attention on it. 2019, 2020, 21, 20, here we are with another event on the Sahel and coastal West Africa. The fact that we did a 3D trip to coastal West Africa together, a place like Togo was probably the highest level US government trip in recent memory. The world is now seeing the problem for what it is. and we're trying to do what we can to fix it. Luckily, we have the Global Fragility Act and the new strategy to do something different, to actually try to prevent something. The last trip I took before COVID was to Niger, Burkina Faso, and Ghana when I had to scramble home and they shut down. My first multi-country trip after COVID was with these two wonderful people to West Africa. Last spring in The Hague, the government of the Netherlands convened a meeting of folks from the Sahel, folks from coastal West Africa, government, non-government, other donors, to focus for 2 days on the problem set. I was struck there by how much agreement there was on the mistakes that we all witnessed slowly for 10 years in the Sahel, primarily, but not exclusively, the mistakes in Mali. I was struck how the governments of coastal West Africa have seen how things can go poorly and have decided for themselves that they want to lead whatever happens in their countries. I think we saw that just last week when the Accra initiative, some of the countries said, we're going to go to Burkina Faso to help out. And Burkina Faso said, we don't actually want foreigners helping us. Now we got to work out how we're going to work together on this. But African-driven decisions and African-driven leadership, everyone has decided that's what we're going to do. And this week is going to be critical to that. We, under our strategy, and as Ann said, we will be coming out with the plans very soon. We want to support African leadership. Our strategy is to help these countries with their strategy. What we need then is a strategy to back, and that's coming together. I think we were struck on our trip by the senior attention that we received, but that the people in Togo, Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, they're grappling with these things in real life. There was a misperception, I think, in DC, at least last year, that somehow the governments in these countries didn't really see the problem for what it was, and that they somehow had to be educated on what the problem is. I think that's rather insulting. It's not a creeping violent extremist threat from the north going south. That's a symptom, but that's not the cause. The insecurity is a symptom, it's not the cause. The lack of inclusive governance is the cause. And these countries see it. We heard a very senior ranking military official say, the insurgents understand our youth more than we do. And that's a problem. And when I think about what is the actual problem, I picture in my mind a young man, maybe the third born, and he lives in Burkina Faso on the border. Maybe he lives in Niger, maybe he lives in Mali. Doesn't really matter. In his daily life, it doesn't really matter. He doesn't see the government very often. He doesn't have any prospects. He owns a motorcycle and he makes a little money driving people and goods back and forth over a border. One day the military shows up. They say, well, we're taking away no more motorcycles because the bad guys ride motorcycles. You just took away his only way of making a living. He goes to a checkpoint. They stop him. They don't speak his language. They're from a different part of the country. They ask for an ID. He doesn't know what they're saying, and he doesn't have an ID, never has had one. He gets beat up. What's he going to do for a living? A few days later, insurgents come to town. Do you want a new motorcycle? Do you want a gun? Do you want some money? He's not extremist. He's just being rational. If you're in a place and something bad happens, do the youth run towards the police or from the police? In a lot of these places, they run from the police. The problem isn't with the youth. The problem's with the police. For almost a decade on our programs to counter violent extremism, we focused almost exclusively on these young men, sometimes women, but angry young men. We thought that was the problem. It took us a while to realize they have a good reason to be angry sometimes. It's not their problem, it's the government that hasn't extended a hand to them, that they've never seen. So that's the problem, working in the periphery of the periphery. Our job now is to work with the governments who get this problem but are under-resourced and have asked for our help, and work with not just the government, but civil society. Because you'll never, ever be able to actually assess what the issue is without civil society. It's civil society that's going to be designing the solutions. It's civil society that's going to be implementing a lot of these solutions hand in hand with government. Can't be at the national level only, but it has to be at the national level. It can't be just at the local level, but it has to be at the local level. It can't be purely security focused, but it does involve security. So how do we, as Anne said, under our new strategy, with humility, because we've learned, or we're trying to learn from our mistakes of the past, how do we go in with humility, our ears open, listening and working in true partnership? Under the Global Fragility Act, there's 4 main objectives: prevention, stabilization, partnership, and management. The emphasis is on the partnership, not just with governments, but with civil society. So I'm very much looking forward to what our colleagues have to say. We come in partnership, we come with humility, and we come to listen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Assistant Administrator Jenkins. Dazzy size, please.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, IRI. Thank you, distinguished panel members, colleagues, for being here today. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. As was mentioned, Anne does a fantastic job of introducing our Global Fragility Act and our U.S. strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability, covering how we see this new initiative from the U.S. government point of view. And then Rob does a very good job of talking about the specific drivers of instability and some specific challenges that we have ahead of us. And as he pointed out, that usually leaves me, who always goes third, with not much left to cover, because they did a fantastic job of covering everything. So what I'd like to do is just take a little bit of time, talk some points specific to Department of Defense, because we might not all be familiar with how Department of Defense works in the overall equation. So the Department of Defense is proud to support State Department and USAID and our African partners as part of the U.S. strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability. I emphasize the part of the support. So, and many times in many places in the past, DoD has been in a position to take lead, if you will, around the world when we're trying to help prevent conflict and promote stability. And being in lead and doing it on our own only meets with minimal success. And so we understand underneath this new strategy that we are in a support role. Certainly we are responsible for assisting in the security sector, but we take our lead from the diplomats and we follow the significant invitation by our development colleagues and try to support those efforts. We understand that, we appreciate that, and we think that's an appropriate role for the Department of Defense. So while my office in Pentagon is responsible for coordinating with state and USAID on the policy level, for us in Africa, our U.S. Africa Command, our Regional Combatant Command, is really our center of gravity and responsible for implementation on the ground. So we work very closely with them, our colleagues on the Joint Staff, to support the implementation of this strategy. Our primary objectives under this strategy is improve the capacity of partner nation security forces, focusing in on professionalization and strengthened civil military coordination, and always including a strong focus on human rights, as well as improving their resiliency to the drivers of instability. We're working with state and aid. We ensure our security cooperation programs of training exercises, leadership education, mill-to-mill exercises, engagements are synchronized with our diplomatic and development efforts. So security is only part of the overall component, as Rob was saying. It is security and stability. Moreover, I would point out that, as Rob was saying, when we spoke to a lot of leaders on the continent, they understood that. But when we continue to speak in a little bit more detail, and indeed, even when we speak with the United States government, I've started to hear things like, but we got to make sure that we have security first. And I think that might be a mistake. It has to be security and stability hand in hand. I think in other places and other times when we thought we needed to get security done first, we never really defined how much security is appropriate for then state and aid to follow on in and do their great and fantastic work. And so we never got past square one. Moreover, as Rob explained, that's really not going to get you to where you want to get. It has to be those drivers of instability, and they have to be worked concurrently and in parallel. And I hope that we can start getting ourselves to stop looking at this as a sequential problem and as a parallel problem. And so again, thank you for having us today. I'm looking forward to listening to the panelists and look forward to speaking to all of you afterwards, before, during, after, about how your Department of Defense can support your Global Fragility Act efforts.
Thanks so much to each of you for those very insightful remarks. Before we move to the next portion of the program, please join me in thanking our senior U.S. officials with a brief round of applause. Thank you again. I'll now hand the floor over to my colleague, Abudu Berti, who's the head of our regional office in Bamako, Mali, and oversees IRI's in-country and regional programs in the Sahel and Littoral states. So please, Abudu, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for having us here. It's a pleasure to come and share some of the insight from the field, some of the discourse to which we have access through the work that we do. I'd like to welcome our guest, our panelist, starting by Dr. Bakari Sambe. Sambe is the Executive Director for the Timbuktu Institute, African Center for Peace Studies. He's the coordinator of the Observatory of Religious Radicalism and Conflict in Africa. He's also an assistant professor at the Gaston Berger University in Saint Louis. Through his institute, Dr. Sambe is a renowned expert on preventing and countering violent extremism across the Sahel and Littoral state, both through the lens of academic and practical applications. His current work focuses on indigenous strategies, cross-border dynamics, and the experimentation of agile approaches in crisis zone. As an expert for the UN, for the EU, for the African Union, for the G5 Sahel, he has notably designed and led the advocacy for the implementation of the G5 Sahel Regional Unit for preventing and combating radicalization, commonly called the CELRAD, and accompanied the process for developing national strategies, VE strategies in Niger, in Burkina Faso, and in the Central African Republic. He produced many manuals and good resilient practices, and he's the author of many articles, namely the one called Islam and Diplomacy in Morocco, African Policy. He also wrote on Boko Haram, a Nigerian problem to regional threats. I am very happy to welcome Dr. Sambe. Thank you for accepting the invitation of IRI and to take time to share some of your expertise with us. Please join me to thank and welcome Dr. Sambe at the International Republican Institute. My second guest is a colleague of mine, Mr. Moise Luka Fonto. Luka is the program manager for IRI in Benin. And since IRI started programming in May 2022, he has led an assessment of political parties' needs, as well as facilitated after-action review strategic sessions and political party agent training for the Benin political parties. He has coordinated several domestic election observation missions including those supported by IRI in 2020, 2021, and 2022 elections. Luka serves as an international long and short-term election observer in Zimbabwe, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in Nigeria, in Liberia, in Togo, and in Tunisia. He started his career as a civil society activist, local facilitator for the Election Commission, and a cross-cultural facilitator for Peace Corps in Benin. He has a master's degree in election management and American studies, and a bachelor degree in American studies from the University of Abomey, Calavi. So thank you very much, dear colleague. It's a pleasure to meet with you in person, and thank you to this, welcome to this event. I'll have some questions for our panelists, and then after all, I'll give the floor to Patrick, and we can open it up for questions. And the very first question that I had that I would address to Dr. Sam is, like, what do you guys believe are the root causes of violent extremism in the Sahel? And why is it like pushing its expansion into the littoral state through the work that you do, Dr. Sam? And please, as Patrick said, be concise and short in the answer so we can maximize time for interactions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Many thanks to IRI for inviting me to Washington. She remember me many souvenirs, if I say in French, when I was part of the IVLP program when I visited this very exciting city. And yes, I think that according to our works and our research in the region, we can conceptualize the root causes of violent extremism are in the intersection of three elements. If you look at all the reports and study we have done in the region, in Sahel, and it is the combination between the very low capacity of inclusion capacity of our states, first, combined to political grievance, economical vulnerabilities, and at the third stage, the capability of violent extremist group to exploit and to instrumentalize the two first, and to play on the push and the pull factors. So it is this in this combination, in this intersection of the three elements, we have the root causes of violent extremism generally. And I think that for the coastal country, I think, and I would like to be frank, we in the Sahel and with our partners, we had done a mistake. The mistake was, and our way to specify when the phenomenon of violent extremism was observed in Northern Africa, we have all the conception of the world to separate the Maghrebian and the Sahel state and sub-Saharan Africa. And we were surprised by what happened in Mali, and after spreading to Niger and Burkina Faso. And we had another mistake. I think that our mistake was these last 10 years, we have extracted Central Sahel from the rest of West Africa, neglecting the fact of those countries were not the focus. Just we focus on the Central Sahel with G5, was the country from where we can have some trade, including how they trafficking, border management, everything. So in our conception of the Saharan crisis, we have extracted the Central Sahel from the rest of West Africa, and now we are talking about the littoral state. We should, in the beginning, talking about West Africa, knowing that first the Sahara has never been an irreversible barrier, but an inland sea which invite to go shore to shore. And in the meantime, the Sahel state, the central Sahel, like Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, was not disconnected from the rest of West Africa. And I think that now we have open eyes talking about spillover. So we have to reconsider this area as a very connected area, and to avoid, and now how the issue is how to work on this issue is to do not replicate the mistake in the Sahel in the coastal countries. Yeah, if you don't mind, I will come back with another question for this aspect. Thank you, and I'm sorry for my very francophone English.
No, it's okay. Now I'd like to turn to Luka. We have a regional program on the littoral state that seeks to harmonize the policies and practices, to counter and prevent violent extremism. And some of those activities are managed directly through the country coordinator in the Benin office. Through the conversation you have access to with political parties, with civil society in Benin, what do you believe are the root causes of violent extremism, and why is the expansion going towards the littoral state countries, especially that Benin has already registered some attacks?
Thank you. I think I'll first start with a joke, and I'll ask my two colleagues here, why are they bringing those attacks to Benin, to the littoral countries? Because for long, these attacks have been noticed only in the Sahel and now spreading out to the littoral states. That's a pity. First, I would like to thank those that have thought about the GFA for including my country, the 5 that are selected in the region. It's a good thing because the country is going to benefit from the experience, the money, and the support from USA. But it's also bad because it means that there's something wrong in the country. And that's what we are talking about now. It's wrong, there's something wrong. And what can be the cause? If you go back for Benin situation, if you go back like 3 years ago or 4 years ago, we've never experienced such attack before, because for us in Benin, when we talk about attacks or violent extremism, those are things that we read in the news, we see in the movies. We never think that thing will come to Benin. But now, yes, we're experiencing them. The first, if I may say, the first terrorist act that happened in Benin was in 2019, especially on May 2019, the 1st of May, with the kidnapping of the 2 French tourists in northern Benin, in the park in northern Benin. And for those who know Benin, on May 1st, 2019, that was like 3 days after the legislative elections in the country. And those elections were the most violent since then in Benin. So for the first time since, I knew Benin, because I was not born in Benin, but for the first time, this was the first time we were hearing about violence during elections. So the violence that broke out on the 28th of April extended, and then in the same period, we experienced that first terrorist act, which was the kidnapping. And if I may say, that's where our malheur, I don't know how to say that, but that's where everything started from in Benin. Before that period, we didn't have any kind of attack, but there was a kind of, for what I heard in central Benin and northern Benin, there was a kind of common agreement between the traditional hunters and the people we call jihadists or terrorists, because when you go to northern Benin, you won't hear people saying those words, jihadists or terrorists. They are not used to those words. They just say those people, these guys, but they don't pronounce the word, right? So there was a kind of agreement, common agreement between the traditional hunters and those people. The deal was, okay, you as traditional hunters, you know that we are in the region, you know that we come here, we stay here, and we go to Niger or Mali or Burkina Faso to perpetrate our coup. When we are done, we come back there to rest, and then we go back. So there was a common agreement, no problem. But after the 2019 elections, when violence broke out, the traditional hunters were the main target of the military forces. And most of them were killed, some were arrested. So the association that we had, like traditional hunters association that we had, broke. And then there was kind of, now there's no more barrier for those people to do whatever they want to do. And how did those violence happen? Why did they happen? Just because there were explicit non-competitive elections. Because in 2019, we had the legislative elections, and many parties were not allowed to run those elections, especially parties from the opposition. And they were prevented because of some articles of the law that prevented them from running. So those parties were not able to run. The region where, I mean, the stronghold, right? They started protesting, we had the violence, and then when the military came out, they started shooting traditional hunters. And then there was no longer barrier between those people. I'm sorry, I'm not using the word because that's how it happened there. So the terrorists now found a way open for them to react. So that's, according to the people of central Benin and northern Benin, that's one of the causes of what we're experiencing. The other thing, the other thing is, yes, thank you. So the other thing is still exclusion, but that's not political exclusion, but exclusion when stigmatizing a category of people, especially the Fulani people. You know, and that has to do also with traditional hunters issue. But we'll come back to that with the following questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luka. We see that there is a link between the political situation in Benin and you know, the fact that violent extremism is spreading to this region. Now, I would like to turn to Dr. Sam to kind of reflect on what are some of the good practices that we have already seen in the Sahel that we might be able to advise to the littoral state countries, because most of the time we focus on what's not going well. I'd like you to extend a little bit on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. In 2015, when I was working to design the CELRAD, the G5 anti-radicalization cell, I met a lot of some scholars, including Muslim scholars. I met one of them in Mauritania. He said that, I said to him, I have a question. What is the cause of radicalization and what is the solution? He said me, okay, I will respond in one sentence. Okay, brilliant. He says, all the thing you see now in the Sahel, kind of radicalization, instability, is the result of the combination between the arrogance of unjust and the ignorance of the victims, okay? And what I see is another mistake was also, before coming to the solution, this huge confusion in the Francophone countries between countering terrorism and countering violent extremism. I think that this region was influenced by what I call the Algerian paradigm within the French approach, which focus a lot on ideology and religious approach. But I think that if I can summarize one of the good practices we can also have together in this country is to try first to fill the gap between international conception and local perceptions by when we design solution. We have more than 20 Sahel strategies, and the majority of these strategies were designed out of the Sahel without the Sahelian. So I think that we have to think about how to engage community, to build community resilience, like what we try to do in Northern Togo with LRI, the Littoral Regional Initiative, and we are thinking about also in Benin. And I think that the youth themselves, they are not just target, but they are actors of prevention, putting the youth in heart of our strategies of resilience. And also, what I say also to our partners, it is time. In Africa, people say to you, it is time to give to our indigenous strategies dignity of solution, giving dignity of solution to our indigenous strategies. Listen to the field without designing strategies from Washington or from Paris or from elsewhere, and to come to impose it. Well, that's why we have also to have a hierarchy of the priority and to differentiate the solution and the strategy. Because according to our works, we just design a kind of typology, call it the moving typology. First, you have the typology of countries which is really hit by massive jihadi and terrorist attacks and engagement. It is like Mali, Nigeria. You have a second typology, which is the typology of the countries under pressure, like Chad, Niger, other countries. And you have the third typology of countries where you can, from now, think about prevention and perspective. But the problem is, when some countries are in this position of to have time for prevention and perspective, they don't do that. They say, no, it's not a problem. You are importing a problem from elsewhere to our country. It was the case in Burkina Faso when I was in Burkina in 2013. I have published a paper. I gave a report to the UN, and the others, they said, oh no, it's impossible in Burkina Faso. And the attack in Burkina Faso was, from my perspective, the symbol of the regionalization of the threat and also the end of exception. We have to be frank with our state to say them, it is now the time, the end of exception. There is no exception. And also to address another issue, which is the all military approach. I see the Accra initiative, they have meeting, okay, we have destroyed 20 terrorists. And by doing that, we are creating the future community conflict in the region. You know, a gun has never killed an ideology. We need education. We need to reinforce community resilience and work with the community and respect the perception of the community and build a solution from the perspective of the local partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You will see that it's really difficult to find something that has really worked in the Sahel, but I thank you for the creation of the CELRAD, with which IRA is working today. Do you see such a practice, annexed to the Accra initiative, for example, like a civilian component of the prevention that could help, what the Accra initiative is already looking forward to doing with the joint military force?
From my opinion, the Accra initiative needs help. Otherwise, they'll focus on the military aspect, just on the military aspect, neglecting the role of the communities. I see the good job done in northern Ghana, like in the region of Tamale, in the dialogue between the Fulani and the breeders and the farmers. I see this kind of initiative are very urgent, and otherwise the Accra initiative will try. Yes, they say they will try to build security, everything. You see the same thing in Togo, in Benin also, and in Ghana. They have not sufficient capacity to resolve the problem in the military way. They need support to convince them that they have to include community solution, dialogue, youth engagement, and also what I call the religious and traditional legitimacies in order to have a holistic approach. Otherwise, they will continue in the military. Yes, we have killed the 20 terrorists, so 25, And in the meantime, they are creating the cause of future intercommunal conflict in northern Togo, in northern Benin, and in Ghana, and in Ivory Coast, where we have published a report concerning the northern part of Ivory Coast, the Bunkani region, which is close to Burkina Faso and Mali. I think we have to talk to those stakeholders to make a difference, to have a mixed approach, how to manage the security emergencies, because it's very urgent, and how to have this mixed approach by managing security emergencies, and in the meantime, preventing violent extremism to address the root causes in the meantime.
Thank you very much. I'd like to turn to my colleague, Luka. As you said, we're sorry that we've transported our problems to your country, but it's been a long time that we see what's happening in the Sahel, and different diplomacies, including the French diplomacy, have really warned against the propension of VE to countries like Benin, like Cote d'Ivoire. But what are we really missing in the conversation? Something might not be right. Maybe there is something we're not considering so far.
Thank you. I think you are right. That's something we've heard and we've read. Unfortunately, it came to us. To be honest, I was also looking for what went well in the Sahel so that we can replicate in Benin. But it means that there's a lot to do altogether, right? So we need to learn from what didn't work in the Sahel to try to shape what we want to do in the littoral countries. So what we miss is like a bit of what he just said. I think government thought the only solution was military. And like what they just said, I mean, the fight against terrorism or jihadism was related to the number of terrorists that were killed. But unfortunately, that's not the case, because I mean, if the ideology is, they have the same ideology. If you kill one or two, you may have like 8 or 10 later. So I think we missed the education, like civic education, especially education of people of those communities. We missed ways to include them or to incorporate them as full citizens of a country. When you take the Fulani people, they are all across the countries of West Africa. They first, they feel like they are not full citizens. And unfortunately, people see them as such, because they are moving from one country to another, because most of them, they are herders. So they're moving from one country to another. And people don't see them as full citizens while they are full citizens. There's something that is happening in northern Benin now, and that's something we pointed out recently to the Election Commission. In one region, there are 2 communities. Like there's one local, I'm making the same mistake. I was about to say one local community, but there are 2 communities in the region, like the Fulani people and another community. But when the Election Commission wanted to publish the voters list, they published the voter list only in the side of the other community. So the Fulani people felt they are not involved, so they are not part of the country. So they didn't want even to check the names. They didn't want to go and verify their name, because they say, if we are members of this community, they should also have posted, like published the list in our community. And this is something that can bring violence, for instance. And when it brings violence, it helps people, or unfortunately, it enhances radicalization. So those are things that maybe we do without knowing, that we improve, we increase the number of people that are radicalized without knowing. Unknowingly, we are trying to enforce them or, increase the numbers. So I don't know if you understand what I mean, but that's it. So what we miss is to consider everyone as full citizen first. Give them all the same rights. Because when public school is free, it should be free for everyone, every citizens of this country. But when you say, okay, you people, you are not here, it becomes like I'm thinking like one Fulani. So today is in Nigeria, tomorrow is in Benin, the day after he's in Togo. So people will say it's like a bat. You are not a mammal, right? You are not a oiseau, right? A bird, you are not a bird, you are not a mammal. So you are in between. So it's something like that. So they are not from Nigeria, they are not from Benin. They are not from Benin, they are not from, so they are from nowhere. So when they think that they are from nowhere, so it's easy to have these people radicalized than if they feel like they belong to a community. So we need to work to have all those people, like I said, within the community and work together, even if we don't have they are not stable in the country. And that's why it's very interesting to point out something that has been popularized now in Benin, is to create groups in bordering regions, including those Fulani leaders. Because when they know that they belong to this group, which is in this country or that country, then at least they have someone to report to. Because when they face issues with farmers, when they face issues with farmers and they go to the police will take side for the farmer instead of the other. So they feel like they don't need to go to the police, because if they go to the police, they already know what the answer is. But when they feel like they are listened, there are people who listen to them, who can help them solve their situation, I think that will help a lot, ease the situation in those regions, for instance.
Thank you very much. I have only one more question. An expert from the G5 Sahel was supposed to be here. He couldn't make it, but I would like to turn to Dr. Sam, since you work with those regional institutions like the G5 Sahel, the African Union, and of course with the UN also. What do you think could be the potential role for this institution to play in the prevention of violent extremism, and especially its expansion to the littoral states?
I think that there is, we can say, yes, in some countries they say America is back, and in other countries, in West Africa, we can say ECOWAS is back. ECOWAS is back, but is ECOWAS is back in the good time? This is the problem. I think that, from my opinion, during all these 10 years in the Sahel, there is what I call the conflict of perception of the conflict. There is a conflict of perception of the conflict between the international approach and the local perception. And the role of organizations like ECOWAS or African Union is to fill this gap and becoming solid and strong partners. But the problem, is the problem of legitimacy, like in ECOWAS in West Africa, regarding the coup and everything, and also the problem of the dispersion. We said on the French dispersion of the partners. The partners when they are dispersed, very disorganized, they disorganize also the states' action, and they disorganize the regional organization, because they come. You have the Switzerland strategy, the French one, the Netherlands, everything, the American. I think that our partners have to be more coordinated. I was last week in the CPO of the Alliance Sahel in Brussels, and I think that this organization can be consolidated, strengthened, in order to fill the gap between the international conception and the local perception. The other thing also, I think that why I say that ECOWAS is back, because during these 10 years, people were focusing just on G5 Sahel. We did lot of things, good things, like the CELRAD. Also, for a good practice, also we have the P4P, the partnership, project partnership for peace for the USAID, which led to designing national strategies. But in the meantime, the government was oriented to the military, and like in Burkina Faso and in Niger. But now, the other role of this organization also is how to involve the local actors, the civil society, including religious leaders and traditional leaders, because they have the legitimacy. They have this legitimacy, sometimes more legitimacy than the state. Because when some people in Africa, in West Africa, say that, yes, there's a lack of state presence, they said, which state is not present? The punishing state is present, and the protecting state is not present. So how to involve those actors, and how to include them in what we are doing? But I think that they need to be strengthened. But in the meantime, our partners in the West have to be more organized and more coordinated between them in order to support this regional organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to stop there for now and open it up for questions by giving the floor to Patrick, but thank you very much for hosting us.
Well, thanks so much, Luka. Thanks so much, Dr. Sami. A lot to think about, digest as we chart a path forward together for the region. So with that, we'd like to open it up to questions both here in the audience and online. I'll be able to view questions coming in from our online audience. There are microphones circulating in the room. Let's start with IRI President Dan Twani. We'll take a few in the room, allow the guests to respond, and we'll go online. So let's start with Dan.
Hey, thanks. I think this has been really an excellent session. I've learned a lot from our colleagues from West Africa. Thank you very much. I was in Nigeria very early when I started at IRI, so this is maybe 2018, and still remember our then ambassador there saying to me, the thing that keeps him up at night, or he's gone now, so I can hopefully quote him, the thing that keeps him up at night is the notion that we would defeat violent extremism in the Middle East, but that the core of global jihadism would move to Nigeria and West Africa. And I remember thinking, is that overdramatic? But of course, we've seen terrible difficulties, as you all have been discussing. So I have two quick questions. One, we all agree on responsive and inclusive governance, community resilience. I think you've made very powerful points, so I don't want to retread those. But what fundamentally can we do to drive broad-based economic development, which would give some of these young men something to do and some commitment and attachment to their communities and their countries? What can we do to drive broad-based economic development beyond inclusive and responsive governance? And what is the role of foreign powers? We haven't heard about Russia, China, other actors from the Middle East in West Africa, some of those malign influences. Thank you.
So before we go here to the audience, why don't we allow the panelists, including Abudu, to address those two questions? So please, start with Abudu if you've had anything you'd like to say.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of preventing violent extremism in the Sahel, there is a lot to do with the economic situation of those young people. And I know that our guests have already extended about that. And this is actually one of the mistakes that the G5 Sahel has done so far. They did not really focus on develop like economic opportunities, especially in border regions, because that's really where most of those attacks and young people joining those VA groups. And it's unfortunate because they have a good economic development plan, but that seems not to really be something of focus from the, I would say, international community or from the partners who come and support. The joint force from the military joint force has received a lot of support, and thinking back about it, if this had been invested in local regions, for example, developing inter-country economic possibilities, creating simple things as education centers, like really to keep young people involved in contributing to the local economy. I think that would have helped better than the joint force, but happy to turn it back to our other panelists for the views.
I think you're right. Thank you, Dan, for the question. I once talked with the Ministry of Interior of Benin, and they told me a story that is amazing. I thought amazing, and I want to share with you. There was a traditional wedding in one region at the border of Benin and Nigeria. So the wedding happened during a weekend, was Saturday. You know, in Benin, before you open a church or a mosque, you need to send a request to the Ministry of Interior. So after the wedding on Saturday, the following week, there were 19 requests sent to the Ministry of Interior to open mosques right after the wedding. That was a sign of, you know, a kind of picture of what's going on in this country. So those people, they recruit via religion. That's why it's very important to include traditional and religious leaders in the strategy we want to implement. Yes, it's fine. It's good to find a way to empower women, to empower youth. Any action that could help improve that is good. But in the case of Benin, I don't think the lack of economical power is that strong as it is maybe in other regions, for instance, because when you listen to the people, especially, sorry, I don't want to stigmatize, but I'm just telling the truth, especially the Muslims, they will tell you, oh, these people, we always see them, they come to the mosque on Friday, they may they preach, and they are very educated people. They are well-educated people. I also met someone who graduated with a doctorate, right? A doctorate, I don't know the equivalent, yes. So which means it's not because that person doesn't have a job, but because of ideology, because of things that they taught him wherever he was. So, well, we need to think about empowering them economically. We also need to think about educating them, involving them, including them in the society. That's what I think. You want to add anything?
I think that in Africa, we are facing the phenomenon of youth, young people who are seeking, who are in a paradox. They are seeking of meaning and seeking of means also. And in the meantime, yes, if I can say, we are facing the consequences of the last 20 years international policies and governance. You think when people talk about the foreign powers, like before Russia, the Gulf countries, for example, why they have succeeded in the Sahel? Because in the 17th, we have this cycle of drought. There is no rain in the Sahel. And in the meantime, our partners in the West were hit by financial crisis, the oil crisis in the 17th. So they don't have money to help Africa. Who have the money? People who are exporting oil. They come for their first Sahelian strategy with two strategies. It was what they call da'wah, is preaching, and ighatha, which is in Arabic, humanitarian work. They convince people that they help them. They have created in Kuwait, for example, an agency for African Muslim, an agency for African Muslims in order to help them, like the US, like USAID or IFD in the French context. And they build a mosque, they build school, competing with the official school. And what our partners from the West have done, another mistake, they imposed to us in the 18th, the political adjustments, the structural adjustment policies, to say to us, okay, we have a very nice receipt for you. You have just to be saved in Africa, you have just to have a liberal economy and privatize the economy, and you can have some democracy, and we'll have development and security. 20 years after, neither development nor security. And in this context, some power have come to Africa, like the Chinese, the others here. Okay, no, don't worry about democracy, about human rights. It's not very useful. You see, we are building the infrastructure, we are doing everything, the big building. What is democracy? It's nothing, you know. And in the meantime, and after that, like the problem, yes, of Russia in the region, the problem we face that the international community, including the European Union, has a champion in the Sahel, which was France. Like a very long train with a locomotive, and the locomotive has some problem, and now all the wagons are trying to say, what do we do? This is the situation in the Sahel. And the difficulty for France is how to manage, in the meantime, emergencies and history in the meantime. The real difficulty for France is how to manage, in the meantime, emergencies and history. And when the Russians come with disinformation, everything, they try to say, okay, yes, another way. And they build their critics, their everything on what the Western power has done in the region, the mistake in the international politics, everything they exploit it. You know the book of Larry Diamond, Ill Winds, about democracy, and I think that now people just say, okay, the problem is due to the Russian disinformation. I say, okay, it's one part of the problem, but we can ask ourselves why in such different culture, like African cultures, why the Russian disinformation works. They have something we have to explore and to better understand the situation. And also, I think that the importance of democracy. We trust on democracy. We need democracy. The democratic principle, we need it. We love it. But the way of practicing democracy these last 20 years, there is some contradiction in some part of the world. And these have a huge influence in the public opinion in our countries, mostly in the young people, the young people who were expecting democracy and freedom, and now who are applauding the putschists and the military. There is something to understand.
Thanks very much to each of you. Before we go to our 44 guests online, please, Hassan, you had a question.
Just counting the pledges of allegiances to the new so-called caliph of the Islamic State, out of 13 confirmed pledges, even not counting Tunisia, 5 come from Africa, and they are the most impressive in terms of the number of people who are making the pledges. Actually, what you were told then in Nigeria is coming true. Now Africa is the center of gravity of the global jihadist movement. And actually, I think it's important to underline here that it's not fill in the gaps, but it's a deliberate strategy on their part. The deliberate strategy has to do with what you're mentioning, failure over 50 years to address issues of sound governance and national integration, national identity. And my question to you, and it is really actually more of a desperate question here, given that we have a track record of 50 years of failures at a time when there was all over Africa the desire to, as a result of independence, as a result of charismatic leaders, the desire to move forward with the nation states, okay? And at 50 years of failure, I mean, again, with exceptions, but I'm saying globally, how much we can rely on that now that we have a counter strategy that says not only there is such a failure, but they're using part of that strategy, using the same tactics as some of the security states have used, which is kill as much as possible, use this jujitsu approach of be murderous in certain regions in order to cause animosity between tribes, animosity between populations, animosity between regions, and therefore make it irreversible. And my question to you, do you think measures such as seeking, let's say, civic education or civic integration without accusing actually the young man of being deluded or being misled or being uninformed or being ignorant, can that counter the deliberate strategy of creating, not only creating schisms, but using these schisms in order to lead not to an alternative system? There is no alternative jihadi system. Salafism does not have a formula to run anything, but to be the spoiler, to be the destructor, to be the destroyer of what is. So do you think that these measures, meaning measures of education and measures of civil society engagement, again, I'd like the answer to be yes, but I'd like you to convince me.
So before you convince Hassan of the answer, let's take one question from online, then we'll allow all of you to respond to each of them, and time permitting, we'll take perhaps one more, perhaps from Luka. The question online is from Daniel Azinga from the African Center for Strategic Studies. It says, thank you very much to the panelists. Very much appreciate the focus on education and the need for other essential government services. I would love to hear more from all of you on your views regarding dialogue with armed groups in contexts where insecurity prevents the delivery of government services. So why don't we go Dr. Sam first and then come back down through the other two panelists, please, to either of the questions.
Okay, yeah, we need to build alternatives. But there are some attempts in the region, like the strategy in the lecture. You? In Indonesia, you said? No, in the region, in the lecture basin, there is some alternative, but some with the strategy with the African Union and the lecture basin commission, they try to have a strategic communication strategy to counter this narrative and to focus on civic education. But how to do with very weakened state due to the structural adjustment, they build less and less schools. And what I say also is we are from the region where buying a second-hand tank is more expensive than building a school. But who have to make the choice? Us, our partners, or we have also to co-construct the alternatives also regarding to the priorities. And I think that, you know, when people in Benin talk about terrorism, they say, okay, the attacks. I know we have to be aware that the attacks are the ultimate step. We see some very weak signal we have to take into account. But I cannot convince you by one solution. But if I can give you a word, is how to co-construct alternatives. That's why we are here. Regarding the Islamic State, we will have but I agree that Africa is now the main focus of Islamic State. They have a kind of journal called An-Naba. 70% of the pages are regarding Africa. So Africa is now the new weak link we have to strengthen against this ideology of Islamic State. But to finish, I think that I have some hope because, you know, when people 10 years ago, when people talk about international community, the international community, yes, okay, if you have the US, the French, and British, when they condemn something is international community, okay, I agree. But now we are becoming more and more a real international community. We are now the international vulnerable community. We have the vulnerability we share. we are vulnerable to terrorism in Gao, Tombouctou, and in Washington, and everywhere. So it is time together to think about this shared vulnerability and to co-construct the solution placed to imposing solution or conserving solution abroad and imposing in the field. We have to listen to the field, listen to the community, and engage civil society organization, and including religious leaders, the youth, and to make them not just like I think like our target, but our partners to build all these indigenous strategy and solution in the field. Thank you.
Wonderful. So recognizing the time with about a minute, 30 seconds left until 11, I would ask each of our final two panelists 30 seconds, no more reactions to the two questions, and then we will wrap up.
Okay. First, okay, only 2 seconds, 2 minutes. First thing regarding China and Russia influence in Benin, for instance, for now, there's no specific action from those countries, but especially for China, they are very involved in constructions, in all those things, providing jobs to people. So that's where, that's how everything starts. They're starting doing this, and then we start talking to people. So who knows? Maybe in the next few years, we're gonna say something. So we still have time. If we want to stop it, we still have time to do that. And it's the same thing regarding the Benin case, as far as violent extremism is concerned. For now, if you look at the Benin case, only the military forces and the police are being attacked by those people. For now, they just tell the population, we don't have anything to do with you. Our target is the government. So that's the situation. But who knows, when they are done with the government, when there's no more police and military in the region, who knows what is next? So we need to stop it while it's still time. Civic education, so that's where we should start. It's good that now we are involving the government aside of the military aspect, aside of the military Accra initiative. It's good that we are involving the government. I was raised in Ivory Coast, where at school we got civic education. And during civic education, they will tell you what is a country, what's a nation, what makes a nation, all those things, but that no longer exists. Even Benin, that no longer exists. When you go to school, the only thing they teach you is the flag, and that's all. So we need to start from there. And when citizens know what is a nation, because there's a country, but then there's a nation. When they know what a nation is, they can be more protective of the nation than what they are now. Dialogue, I think we can't do anything without dialogue. Everything is around dialogue. Even the first war, the second war, World War, it ends after a dialogue. So everything is around the table to find a solution.
Thank you. All right, final word to Abudu, please.
Wow, that's a big responsibility there. But thank you very much for the two questions. I'd like to bring back the case study of Mauritania. In the Sahel, they are a driving force developing counter narratives, to the VE discourse. They have developed a tool called the Discours Alternative, the alternative discourse. And that is a tool that we are using right now in our Sahel regional program to put together youth, women, and those religious leaders, especially at border regions, so that they can sit and discuss what is the alternative discourse that really actually deconstruct the narrative that you would hear from those VA groups. I think if we couple things like that with civic education programs, with economic development, opportunities for youth, we'll be able to curve down the level of violence, but also to really deconstruct the VE ideology in this region. So it's not only one thing, but it's a combination of many aspects. But I think that's a good example. In terms of dialogue with the VE groups, the case of Mopti in Mali is a vivid example. It's very difficult for me working in DRG to see exactly what the states are going to discuss with those groups, honestly. The case of Mopti, for example, they said, okay, there is an era, you give the control, of this Mopti zone to us. And then this will be ruled by Islamic principles. You give the zakat to us, and then there is going to be no more attacks. And to some degree, I think the local authorities have accepted some of those conditions. And that's why the schools have been able to open. Yes, dialogue, but in a full transparent way, which I really don't foresee our states doing so far. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks again to all of our panelists. Thanks once more to all of our senior U.S. officials who joined us today. And thank you all for joining us online. With that, we'll conclude. Those of you here with us in person, feel free to help yourselves to the remaining coffee, pastries, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. Thanks a lot. I got fired up. I wish I could come on a trip with you guys.
Yeah.
Three amigos, three musketeers. I don't know what
Yeah, so we have the lights off and the actual.
show force demonstration. Thank you. Well, thanks for helping. Thank you. To do a lot of this,